Следующий спикер у нас это Хенк Энтинг, на сегодняшний день ведущий специалист по птицеводству компании Cargill, занимается всей научно-исследовательской экспериментальной работой этой компании с 2013 года. До этого он имел огромный опыт работы в этой же области в ряде других компаний. Проработал в компании Traum Nutrition, Nutreka с 2008, точнее с 2005 по 2013 год. Он специализируется на кормлении сельскохозяйственной птицы и обладает огромным багажом знаний смежных областей в том числе. Поэтому давайте послушаем презентацию и после этого, если будут вопросы, продолжим. Пока мы в плане по времени.
Good afternoon, everybody. Then in the next, let's say, 30 minutes, we will have 45 minutes. We will have an introduction about feeding strategies. How to deal with replacement of the antibiotics and also reduction, and what kind of nutritional strategies we have for that. What I will do in this presentation is that I will show you data from our own research, also recent work that we have done with turkeys on the reduction of the antibiotics, and I would like to show you some examples from other countries as well. That have been working already for a longer time on the reduction of the antibiotics. If you look at the whole discussion about replacing the growth promoters, but also reducing the antibiotics, what you can see is that from about 2006 on, we have the discussion already on the removal of the antibiotics in the feed. And also later on in 2009, there was further discussion on a big reduction of the antibiotics also in the drinking water. And what we have seen over time, that it has been possible to reduce the antibiotics in both the feed and in the drinking water, but that also it was needed to have a very big focus also on farm management, besides actually the use or the focus on changes in the feed, where it also became clear that when you look at the feed, you have to do several things, several adjustments in order to be able to reduce the use of antibiotics in the feed and also in the drinking water. So there's no single solution or no single additive that you can apply and that then will help to reduce the antibiotics and also replacement of the growth promoters. One of the things that we learned is that initially we can get a good reduction in the use of antibiotics, but then in recent years we see actually it's getting more difficult to get to a further reduction. Overall, we have been able to reduce also drinking water use with around 70%, but we are still not able to get to a complete removal of the antibiotics in the feed. The good news is in the more recent years, with that lower use of antibiotic, is that what we see is that some of the antibiotics that did not work anymore, and now they have not been used a lot, we see that the resistance against these antibiotics is getting less. So we actually can use some of these antibiotics again that had resistancy. So the discussion is also now if we can move to some kind of responsible use of antibiotics, that by the low use of antibiotics, we also do not get into resistance problems. One of the examples we have with the reduction of the use of antibiotics in both feed and drinking water is also coming from Western Europe, where I have two examples from the UK and also from the Netherlands about the use of antibiotics in feed and drinking water. One of the things that was done by the British Poultry Council was also a big focus on the improvement of farm management and making changes in the feed. Where over time 90% of the, let's say, the more critical antibiotics has not been used anymore. But one of the things that was also clear from the UK that if you look at turkeys, in general, it's a bit more difficult to get to a good reduction of the antibiotics compared to what we see in, for instance, broiler chickens. One of the reasons for that is also probably that we are translating work and experience from broiler chickens and swine to turkeys, while turkeys are very different animals. So also the additives and the changes that we have to make in turkey feeds are different from the changes that we have been making in broiler and also in swine feed. Here you have on the right-hand side an example from the Netherlands, which is the total use of antibiotics that we have until 2006. We were still allowed to use growth promoters in the feed, and still 1 year after we stopped with the use of the growth promoters, you still saw that the use of antibiotics in the drinking water was still getting higher. And actually from 2009 on, we had the obligation to reduce the use of antibiotics with a 70% target in 2050. That more or less has been possible. Let's say a few years later, now we are around at its 70% level. But one of the things that you also see, we are getting more to a stable situation, and it's getting more difficult to get to a further reduction. Still we have to do more work and more research also on how to remove further the antibiotics also from the drinking water. But one of the big things also in the UK and also in the Netherlands, let's say by initially focusing a lot on improvement of farm management, that was also one of the key factors to get to a reduction of antibiotics by also, for instance, comparing good and good farms that were not using a lot of antibiotics with farms that were using a lot of antibiotics, and that helped to get a substantial reduction in the use of antibiotics. One of the things that was clear when you look at the reduction of the antibiotics is that basically if you look at the working mechanism of the antibiotics, but also the growth promoters, there are two major working mechanisms. One is more the change in the microbiota that these antibiotics are having, but also that they have a strong effect on immune responses and actually help to reduce the immune responses in general, so you have a better use of the energy in the birds. Given the fact that actually these antibiotics work on different aspects, for that reason it's also very unlikely, or it was unlikely, that by moving to more or removal of antibiotics in the feed, we had to combine different changes in the feed. So one single change would not solve the problem. So we had to work on different levels, different factors also in the feed, the total composition, to see how to get to a lower use, also to build that nutritional strategy on how to reduce the antibiotics. When you look at the, let's say, the key factors on how the, let's say, antibiotics are working, then focusing on the day-old chicken quality, day-old bird quality, and also then the gut health as such, and all the main functions of the gut were actually key to get to a reduction in the use of the antibiotics. And if you look at the gut and the main functions, then one of the major functions is actually the host of the microbiota, where we actually aim for let's say balanced microbiota that does not generate immune responses. So that is also one of the major factors. And also when you look then at the link between the microflora and also the immune responses, one of the things that we also are looking for when looking at the reduction of the use of antibiotics is that the immune responses, like you also are actually controlling with the use of antibiotics, is that we want to have controlled immune responses, not too much, but also not too little. So that's also one of the key factors looking at the nutritional strategy. And in some of the next slide, I will give a number of possibilities that we have there to also look at these immune responses. The other thing is that if you look at let's say the main role of the intestinal tract is also the digestive function, but also there how to optimize the digestibility of the feed and absorb as many nutrients as possible, because the higher the digestibility, the better we are also able to control the microflora, because the microflora will use part of that undigested feed. So there's a very big link also between controlling the microflora and then moving or improving the digestibility of the feed. The last part, also a key point where we focus on, if you talk about gut health and removal of antibiotics, is actually the gut barrier function, where we also try to keep the situation that the bacteria stay in the intestinal tract and cannot have transallocation to the system as such or get in the blood, because that will generate, again, immune responses. So also maintaining a good cell integrity in the intestinal tract is also one of the key factors. When you look at the different possibilities for nutritional strategies, then we are focusing on all these different components, which is basically look at optimizing digestibility of the feed, and also use then as precise description of the nutrients, support of the development of the intestinal tract. So I'll give some examples of that as well. And one of the main things is also to remove or reduce that amount of fermentable substrate, because that makes that bacteria can grow in different parts of the intestinal tract. And I will show in some of the next slides that especially in turkeys, there is a huge variation, huge change also in the microflora when turkeys are getting older. So also in different stages of the life of a turkey, it's very important to look at what is the microflora doing and how to control that microflora, especially when we are not using the antibiotics in the feed or in the drinking water. One of the other things is also more, let's say, supporting the, let's say, gut health as such, which is then mainly the part of the additives. I would say this is more the ingredient part where we have to look at the raw materials. And here it's more about the additives that we can use either for further improvement in gut health or also to stimulate health in general. One of the things that we think is very important when we are looking at the raw materials is actually to select for raw materials with a maximum digestibility, but also know exactly what is the digestibility of all these raw materials. Because the lower the digestibility, the more undigested material will be there in the intestinal tract. So the more you have the risk that you will have bacteria overgrowth, which is then translating into lower performance, but also more wet litter issues. And one of the things that we have developed also, especially with also the reduction of the use of antibiotics in mind, is actually that we have moved from, let's say, fixed digestibility coefficients, what you normally are using, to, I would say, flexible digestibility coefficient depending on the raw material quality. So we have developed within our own company a very accurate system to predict digestibility coefficients of different raw materials. And that's actually used to make a further prediction of how much fermentable substrate we have available in the intestinal tract. Looking at the other factors, so that is a very important thing, and that is, let's say, making a difference when you are talking about reduction of the antibiotics. The other part is also more on the development of the digestive tract, and also, let's say, making there a good digestive function, and also focusing then on the fermentable substrate. But first we'll have a look at some of these effects on the development of the intestinal tract, where it mainly comes to the composition of the pre-starters, also especially with some of the immune stimulating components that we have there, and also looking at, let's say, some of the other ingredients, but also of the fiber type that we can use in this pre-starter feed, because also there we have seen that that is having a very important effect on the microflora development. Also, let's say, use of vitamins and other additives in the drinking water the first few days can also help to get a good start of the turkey pulse. One of the things that has been given a lot of attention is also the use of coarse particles and coarse fiber, where we have seen that in turkeys, the effect of coarse particles is not as good as what you see in the other species, especially not in young turkeys. So for young turkeys and turkeys in general, there's more focus on the fiber type and also the particle size of the fiber than actually the coarse particles. But in both cases, what coarse particles and also coarse fiber are doing is that they change the transit time in different parts of the intestinal tract. Usually you get a little bit of better acidification, which is translating to a better protein and also a better starch digestibility. And also with the flux, the movement of the nutrients in the intestinal tract, which is a little bit better with the coarse fiber. We in general get to a better digestion, but also have a lower risk of bacteria overgrowth because the feed is moving a little bit faster through the intestinal tract. But in general, we see that coarse fiber for turkeys is more important than the coarse particles. And to give an example of that, I have here an example of very fine feed and a more coarse feed. With this is the average particle size. And if you then look at, let's say, the young birds, what you see here that in general, there's not a very clear effect. Let's say the intermediate particle size, let's say not too fine and not too coarse, seems to help young turkeys best. And we have also seen ourselves, if you move a little bit to, let's say, more coarse particles than this, that you will see a negative effect on the performance. So for young turkeys, looking at the particle size, that particle size of around 600 microns seems to be a nice one for the starter phase. One other thing is that if you look at the later age in the turkeys, if you have, for instance, a fine grinding of the raw materials and then your pellet feed, or a coarse grinding also in the pelleted feed, then looking at the performance, where you see, for instance, in broiler chickens or also in swine, responses on performance. When we are getting to the older turkeys, it looks like there is actually no benefit of the coarse particles if you grind the feed more coarse. So also when looking at the antibiotic strategies, this does not seem to be one of the things that is a good direction. One of the things that we do take into account is actually more coarse fiber. And here we have an example from different levels of soybean hulls, 3, 6, or 9%. And if you then look at, let's say, the body weight, we see that generally a little bit moving to more coarse fiber as such can have a positive effect on the fibers, where still at a younger age, especially when you look at the gain to feed, so the feed conversion ratio, that tends to be a little bit better with a low inclusion of the fibers. But if it's getting to the older birds, then a somewhat higher inclusion level seems to give the best performance, which is also translating into better performance later on. And also when you move to the older turkeys, also there we see in general a better use of the fiber. So when moving to, let's say, feeds without antibiotics, we also give a lot of attention to the fiber source and the fiber type, where we tend to move to higher fiber when the birds are getting older. And in that sense, it's more fiber as such important, and still keep a, let's say, a intermediate particle size to have the best effect on the intestinal tract. Another thing that we focus on a lot, and I will show you a nice example of that in turkeys, also how the microflora is changing in the turkeys with age, is more the focus on the fermentable substrate, with special attention also on fermentable crude protein, because we see that that is one of the main things to focus on when you look at the ingredients, when we are moving to lower use of the antibiotics. Let's say when you talk about, let's say, more fermentable crude protein, it's more, and the carbohydrates is more to give, let's say, prevent that we have a too high level of undigested nutrients in the intestinal tract, because the more we have that, the higher the risk we have that we have an undesired growth of the bacteria in the intestinal tract. And one of the examples that we are also using in turkeys started actually with work in broiler chickens with several trials. where we have different levels of fermentable crude protein. So that's an undigested protein that cannot, or that will be fermented by bacteria. There's also one part that is escaping from fermentation. But here we have a trial example, 2 levels of undigestible crude protein or fermentable crude protein, low level, 1.6% and 2.4%. If we look at all our trials, and we come to the example in the Turkish in the next slides, is that in general, when we started with broilers, that we saw if we had a high amount of fermentable crude protein, but for the rest, all exactly the same digestible amino acids, we always see a negative effect on performance, although digestible amino acids are exactly the same. And one of the things that we think is the explanation for that negative effect of the, let's say, the fermentable crude protein is actually how the bacteria in the intestinal tract are dealing with that undigested protein. What we have here on the right-hand side is an analysis of the microflora, but then given in a principal component analysis, where basically the average or the center point is more or less an average microflora, and the more it goes in different directions, the more different microflora. One of the things that we see in all the trials, and also if we go to the Turkey trials in the next slide, is that if we are having high fermentable protein, high protein, we see a different microflora than if we have low fermentable protein. And one of the things that we normally see, the type of flora that we see here are more the butyrate producers. So that's the microflora that we actually like to see. And what we see with the more high fermentable crude protein is more all the pathogenic bacteria. So we see more Salmonella, we see more Campylobacter. In general, we see also more E. coli when we have diets that are high in fermentable crude protein or high in protein. So protein as such, and also the protein source, is a very important point when we want to control the microflora and actually want to see more these butyrate producers, because when moving to antibiotic-free production, these butyrate producers are extremely important to get to good performance. From all the work that we have done in the field, different regions of the world, what we see as soon as we do not have enough of these butyrate producers in the intestinal tract, we do not see a good performance. And if we have an over supply, or if we have high numbers of all these proteolytic type of microflora, in average, we see always a bad performance in the field. So shifting the microflora in the direction of these butyrate producers is an extremely important point when moving to feeds without antibiotics. To give an example of the, let's say, some more recent work with turkeys that we have been doing, I have here an example of a trial with 2 different of a protein, standard and a 2.2% lower protein, where we kept threonine, tryptophan, isoleucine, valine, and arginine on the same level as in the control group. And we took samples at different ages of the microflora to see how the microflora is changing when birds are getting older, but also when we have these different levels of protein, what is actually happening with the microflora. I will now first go to an example of how the microflora is changing with age in turkeys, and then we'll come to a difference in low versus high protein, how that is making a difference in the turkeys. What you see here is a heat map, let's say in average, the main bacteria in the intestinal tract from turkeys. And here you see the presence with age, where the darker colors, the more brown colors, give a high number, and the more gray colors give a low number of these bacteria. What we normally see if there is a gradual change, what you see here is how the microflora is grouping together with age. So if there's a nice flow, you would see 3, 5 weeks, 9 weeks, 11, 15, and then we would expect 21, but it's grouped in similarities. And one of the things that we then see, if we look at development by age, we actually see that the development is changing by age. So actually every age, we almost see a shift in the microflora, where on average, let's say week 11 and 15 are the ages that we see the bigger shifts. And also in the, let's say, the periods from week 9 to 11, where we tend to see the most wet litter issues, we see actually very drastic changes in the composition of the microflora. This is learning us as well that when we look at the turkeys and we want to replace and reduce antibiotics, that we have to look at the different ages also to see what are the best changes in the feed, and also how to match the feed additives with these changes in the microflora. One of the things that is very remarkable is how the microflora is different when we have low versus high protein. Here we have a principal component analysis again. Center is then the average microflora. Different arrows in different directions indicate then changes in the microflora. These are all the ages with the low protein. And one of the things that we see here, actually, that if we have low protein, we see a very nice building and change in the microflora with not a lot of changes. So with the low protein, you actually get a very nice gradual changes, as also what we want to see when we are not using the antibiotics. When we have the high protein diets, it's actually not as nice. There we have that the ages are jumping actually quite a lot. So you have actually a less stable microflora when we have high protein in the diet, or high protein is actually the normal level. The other one was the much lower level than what we are using today. So moving to lower protein, when we talk about reduction of antibiotics in the turkeys, for us is one of the key factors to work on, because we see with that lower protein, we have a more gradual development of the microflora, but we also see less of these pathogenic bacteria, and we see more of the butyrate producers, and that is actually the type of microflora that we like to see when we are not having the antibiotics. So to summarize let's say the work on the protein, we see that the microflora is keeping on changing in the turkeys, and after 15 weeks is getting more stable. But one of the things that we also see, that if we move to lower protein, in this case 2% lower protein, we see that we have a much more stable microflora, also a gradual development by age, and also we see less of these pathogenic bacteria. We see less Campylobacter, we see less Salmonella, and we also see less E. coli when we are moving to the lower protein levels. So that whole protein piece is one of the important factors to work on. And the last part is more also when we look at, let's say, the gut as such, and also the other additives that we have there to change the microflora, but also to work on immune responses in general. We have also a number of components that we are using there as well to control also the microflora without antibiotics and growth promoters. When we talk about, let's say, the additive range, if you look at more the gut health, there you can look at different components, more say the phytogenic and although the yeast extracts, and I have an example of one of these in the next slides from turkeys as well. You can think about medium chain fatty acids, which can be coconut or palm kernel fatty acids, but that's mainly restricted to the ages that we see a high lactobacillus growth. Organic acids are one of the components there. Then we have the prebiotics more in the, let's say, the pre-starter starter diets. Then we look more also at copper and zinc in the case that that's still allowed. And also when you look at the gut development, also are using higher threonine levels, because we see that is giving a better mucus production and gives better responses under antibiotic-free conditions. To give an example of one of the yeast extract here, I have a result from turkeys with a control feed and then a feed with a yeast extract. This was done in a trial that we did in Germany together with Kartsveen, where we saw that when we were using the yeast extracts, which is both generating some immune responses, but at the same time it's also changing the microflora, is that we see there that on average we see feed conversion ratio quite stable. But we see normally there is a higher feed intake and also a higher growth rate when we use these kind of products. And one of the, let's say, besides changes in the microflora, we also see that it's also generating different immune responses. Here we have the antibody titers in the intestinal tract. That we see also better responses in that intestinal tract, which is also indicating there is a better protection against, let's say, bacteria overgrowth. So that's also one of the reasons that we see or these extracts are also helping in situations of production. Besides that, we actually see also that these yeast extracts in certain fibers can also be beneficial. So the fiber type combined with the let's say the additives is also one of the strategies that we apply for the turkeys in order to work without antibiotics and growth promoters. One of the other examples is again linked to the microflora composition, and here we have an example from the medium chain fatty acids. These are some other ingredients, but one of the more remarkable things always with medium chain fatty acids is that they actually give quite some reduction in the lactobacillus. Here you see a dark blue color. The more dark blue, the lower the amount of bacteria, and here we actually normally see with the use of medium chain fatty acids that it's controlling the growth of the lactobacillus better than other products. And overgrowth of lactobacillus is actually one of the problems that we see in antibiotic-free production. So also there, the use of the medium chain fatty acids can help to control the microflora, but it's also why we are looking at different ages in turkeys with lactobacillus overgrowth. So we also know then when to use medium chain fatty acids as the important control for that bacteria overgrowth. Organic acids are used as well. We have some strong acids, fumaric and citric acids that more are working at a low pH. And then we look more at butyric or butyrate and also sorbic acids, which are more weak acids, but they are still also working at a higher pH and normally are more active in the intestinal tract. So when looking at organic acids, we like to combine these products since they are working in different parts of the intestinal tract. The stronger acids more to get to a little bit of better digestibility, lower pH in the gizzard, and then the sorbic and butyric acids, since they are also still active in the intestinal tract. So we have then different factors, let's say, to look and to work on, and we are looking at the reduction of the antibiotics, where we also look at the last point. If you look at general health stimulation, there we have again some products. If you also look at the tight junction function for more immune responses, we saw the yeast extracts as being more active. Some of these phytogenics we also see having a role where it's more about the role of these antioxidants that are in some of these phytogenics, also for improving the tight junction function. Looking more at the specific immune responses, we are also looking at vitamin E, D, and E, especially also the high D. More the hydroxy variant. And the other thing is that looking at immune responses, we also see that mycotoxins do have an effect on the immune response. So also looking at the mycotoxin levels and keep the levels low, or at least the response. That's also one of the points to look at, but also to control very well then the mycotoxin levels and measure.
I think there is a very poor connection. There is a very poor connection. We can't translate it properly. Well. Can you hear us, Henk?
Then
do you hear
looking at let's say the overall recommendations, then we see that when we want to reduce the use of
Henk, can you hear me?
Antibiotics and growth promoters as a nutritional strategy, we see it's important to combine different adjustments in order to get to a good strategy. And there are different things that we can do, but for...
Can you hear me? Hello?
Let's say looking at the feed, let's say the protein levels and also the fermentable protein level, but also the fiber source. Are the main when we are at turkey feeds without the use of growth promoters. Then on top of
Henk, can you hear me?
That,
can you hear me?
There are different lists that we can select from. We also learned that by looking at the microflora of the turkey for different phases.
Коллеги, я так понимаю, у нас связь очень плохая. Всем было плохо слышно, да, последние минут 10, наверное? Наверное, что-то на той стороне. Я так понял, что Хенк переподключается сейчас. Hello? Хенк? Да. Кто-нибудь есть на связи? Я как один, по-моему, в пещере. Кто меня слышит? Алло,
Слышно вас хорошо.
меня хорошо слышно? Ну, у нас, к
Да,
сожалению, у Хенка, он вот что-то уж совсем на нет сошел последние 5-10 минут. Ну, в принципе, вот его выводы понятны там на слайдах. Он пытался подвести итог, но не смог. Мы его не услышали. Сейчас он переподключится тогда, и мы... Oh, Henk, you reconnected. We couldn't...
Yeah, I dialed in again because I could hear you,
yeah.
Edward, but I think you lost. Did you lose last slide or already earlier on?
We lost you the last 10 minutes probably because the connection was very poor. You can show the final slide again, Henk, just as a conclusion, and we'll finalize that. You have 2 minutes.
Sorry, because then I was not aware of that.
You have
okay,
2
sorry.
minutes to conclude.
I was not aware that the connection was gone.
No problem. We've got
then
the
I
point.
will share
Please.
the last slide.
Yes. Share the screen.
I think you see the slide, isn't it?
Yes, we did, but the voice was very poor. It was interrupted all the time. So just if possible, try to finalize in 2 minutes.
Yeah, I will turn on the camera because I'm afraid that the camera is, I don't know what's happening, but
okay.
yeah, the last slide was about, let's say, then to select different measures. So because the one, let's say, one measure as such will not be good. So we recommend actually to select 3 of the main recommendations. So if you then move to the, let's say, the last slide did have the let's say basic recommendations, but there the main thing is actually to, based on that Turkey trial, to focus also on the mainly the crude protein levels and the fermentable crude protein level, but also to look at the fiber source and the fiber type. Let's say the coarse particles as such are not that important in turkeys. And then depending on, let's say, the different age and looking at the microflora and what is available in a country, to look at, let's say, one of these different additives, to use these as well. And then the use, we do not have a specific preference here. So you see that we like to have a number of these, but it's also more on the availability in the country and what's the most economical one to use and how does that match it best with the microflora that we see in the, let's say, in the country or also in your company. What is the best way to reduce the use of antibiotics in the feed and also in the drinking water. So the summary of the different recommendations was here, but yeah, there was some other information about, let's say, protein and how that's affecting the microflora in turkeys in that earlier section. So I hope you were still able to, that it was still visible just before maybe I dropped out of the meeting. But that is then the summary of the recommendations.
Thank you very much, Henk. It was a very comprehensive concentrate of your knowledge and experience and practical work, and very actual based on the current situation on the market and antibiotics ban from 2006 in Europe and from 2022 in a month they will be banned in Russia. So that's why it's getting more and more popular, these topics, and specialists are looking for substitutes. So just one question from my side. If you were a farmer, what would you choose for minimum cost, maximum effect? We're not talking about commercial products, but from your practical field experience and trials, what 3 products would you choose? Because you had 10 in the table. Can you hear me, Henk? Or we lost you again? Hello? Henk? We don't hear you.
Are you now hearing me, Edward, or?
Yeah, yes, choose 3 products on which you would focus if you were a farmer, a turkey farmer.
Yeah. The question was, Edward, to the main 3 products to focus on.
Yes, for turkeys.
Then it's let's say a product with butyric acid, a product with essential oils, and if available in the market, medium chain fatty acids.
Thank you.